life. I just have to answer the phone, and I get to do all sorts of great things. Oh, I've got a left one, Mike. So, and I get all these calls, they say, will you be on Dancing with the Stars? And I said, well, I don't watch TV. What is it? So you can go into things very scared, very unable to do them, and once you accomplish them, they become some of the most fun things in your life. Why am I here today? Well, it turns out that very often companies want me to speak all over the world to their groups about leadership, or innovation, or creativity, or Apple stories, or education, and I love to do it. But what means the most to me, it's kind of like the early days of Apple. Everything was so exciting, it was such a revolution, and it meant so much, and it was the second most fun time in my life. The most fun time in my life, the most technology developing time in my life was actually in college years. So I always like to go to speak to young students from any age, from second grade up through college, and it's very important to me to communicate the story of Apple. We were young, we were in our young 20s. We had no business experience, no business classes. Steve nor I, we had no savings account. We had no relatives to loan us money. Nobody we knew had any money. So we did everything just the way that the story that I'm going to tell will have a lot of meaning to how you can do what you have, the resources you have. Some of the best things we did at Apple were because we had no money and because we had never done them before and had to think, how is a good way to do this certain thing rather than what is the traditional way, what is the cultural way to do it, the established way. Well, so anyway, youth always meant a lot to me. When I was young, I got into electronics, and first little thing you do is you build a crystal radio. Any of you ever heard of a crystal radio? Yeah, I built it, and what I learned from that was you can build something with electronics that works, and it has absolutely no value. So I didn't really get inspired by my crystal radio. But then I started getting little kits of switches and lights, and switches that had multiple sets of switches in one, called multiple poles. And I discovered that relays could turn on, you add more poles to switches and make them do more things, to turn on different lights and buzzers and all this. We hooked up, we ran wires down we walked on the fence between our houses in the neighborhood I lived in. I was in Sunnyvale, California, when Silicon Valley was Santa Clara Valley, a valley full of trees, as far as you can see orchards. A little housing development. Walk along the fence, nailing in some wires, stapling them into the fence, and we'd run house-to-house intercoms across the street. I could push a button at 2 in the morning and buzz a friend and wake him up, and we could climb out our windows and go toilet paper our houses. So, this electronic stuff was always done in a nature of fun, and it was always personal for us. There was nobody paying us money to do it, giving us a grade to do it, giving us a title. None of those extrinsic rewards that everyone sees. It's just that we felt it was good and it was fun and we were doing it together. Wouldn't have had even Apple if it wasn't like a lot of people that really sat around enjoying doing the same things. So while we were building those house-to-house intercoms and the like, we learned there were a lot of engineers in our area. So a lot of electronic kids on my block. Probably half of the kids knew some electronics and had access to parts in their garages, and they could solder them together and make little devices that would make tones or something. And I grew up in that group. And for some reason on our block, I was kind of like the only one that was in like the smart classes you go to in school. So I was getting the awards for that. And when I was about 9 years old, I built a science fair project. And schools have limitations. They teach you, here's what you do, here's what you learn, here are the pages in this chapter, and the pages in that chapter, and this is the book you use, and this is what we're going to judge you on a certain date. That's a test. That's how schools work. But what is beyond school is what you do on your own time. Pretty much, I was scientific and mathematics, so the answer is always the same. The right answer is the same for everybody. Maybe in essays, people were more into literature and history. They would write, and their combinations of words had different meanings. And I kind of despised that because I wasn't as good at it. So schools don't find things outside of their boundaries very often. And science fair was a chance you make up your own project. You work on it. The projects are often very simple, done over a weekend. Did this huge project. I had 92 switches for all the different natural elements. I collected a bunch of elements in little vials. I even had a mayonnaise jar full of mercury, the metal that rolls on the ground. I'd roll it around and play with that stuff. Never caused me any problems. So built this device, 192 switches, 92 little lights showing the electrons in their various orbits where they would light up. He had got gratis, had to learn to drill holes and mount switches and solder wires to them and go down to switches and use all those poles and relays I was talking about. Had to learn a lot to do it. And I was only about 9 years old or something, and it was huge to look back. How could I have done such a huge project? Then I discovered by accident. I'm here by accident. This was not planned. I just got a call from a friend and said, yeah, I'll come by. And one of the best things in my life were accidental things. I discovered a journal in the hall closet that described ones and zeros of a binary, a base 2 arithmetic. And I learned how to add numbers that were written with ones and zeros. I said, my gosh, this is so simple. A fifth grader can do it. You know, a fifth grader can't do higher level math. You don't have geometry, trigonometry, calculus, whatever all that stuff is, but this stuff is just as easy as normal numbers. So I was kind of surprised, and I started playing on paper, adding the ones and zeros. I learned how to draw little logic diagrams. Logic gates are what computers are made out of. A logic gate makes one decision. If this is a 1 coming in, a 0 comes out. That's a decision. If there's 2 ones coming in, a 1 comes out. That's a decision. So those are the kind of decisions that they make that all the computers we have today are based on. There isn't one digital part of today's computers, or iPhone, or anything that a fifth grader could not totally learn and understand and do. That is true to this day. They can't do the radio. The radio stuff gets into a little bit of equations. Okay, so I read a book. You get inspired by the movies you see, the heroes. I was reading Tom Swift Jr. books, a guy who had a company with his dad, and he'd go into the laboratory whenever there was a world crisis, and he'd build some contraption that would solve the crisis, you know, win a space race or a plasma field to hold an alien presence or something. Wow, this was my hero, you know. I just read those books and loved them. And I think that was a part of, you know, setting you on an inspiration, a direction in life. When I found that journal about computer stuff, I said, wow, this computer stuff is going to be the most fun game of my life to know about and do like crossword puzzles. But it's just a game. I didn't think there were ever jobs in computers. Even when I graduated from high school and I was designing computers on my own, I didn't think there were jobs designing computers. I thought they were all in places, strange places called research, or big companies, or the military. So I'm coming up through school, and in elementary school, I decided to build something closer to a computer, a tic-tac-toe playing computer. A huge piece of wood, pounded nails in, soldered little transistors and diodes and resistors, and soldered together individual rules of tic-tac-toe. You can make a set of rules. You can sit down on paper yourself, and over a couple of days, play every possible game of tic-tac-toe, and write down a set of rules. If you number the squares 1 to 9, write down a set of rules for where the X's are, where the zeros are. What should your move be to never lose tic-tac-toe? So I built this machine, hundreds of transistors pounded in on attached to nails pounded into wood. And that was a science fair project. I look back and I think, God, how can little kids, I see these little kids all the time, if I heard of one of them building something that huge, I'd be just totally amazed. I didn't know what a computer was. I became very shy around that time. Too shy to ask questions, too shy to look for information. But I wanted to know what real computers were, the computers that, you know, the huge ones that filled rooms and did the finances for companies and the military. I wanted to know what a computer was. But one thing I knew, computers calculate. They have to be able to do mathematics. So by 6th grade, I built a device with hundreds of these little transistors, and they were given to me as cosmetic rejects by some companies in Silicon Valley. Hundreds of transistors, with diodes, resistors, making decisions that would add these ones and zeros or subtract them. I put in a switch to subtract. I added in a little circuit of my own design, not copying someone else's circuit. And I built this thing up. And it was just, I look back and I think, oh my God, it was just so far ahead of its time, exactly on the right track towards the Apple II computer. And I didn't know it at the time. I just thought, hey, I'm just doing the thing that I enjoy for life. I did read a book where the hero was a ham radio operator. You probably heard of ham radio. Ham radio operators in those days sent out Morse code and telegraph keys. So you didn't have to be 16 years old like to get a driver's license. So I ordered the information, I studied formulas, I learned how to answer questions about circuits, and I got my ham radio license in 6th grade also. And it was, no, and I was so accelerated, and I never knew it. Nobody ever treated me like that, you know. I mean, I got straight A's in school, and they measured a 200 IQ, but they never told me. So, I'm doing all, they didn't tell me, that's true. They didn't tell me. Didn't try to accelerate me through classes. I'm so glad they've had a normal upbringing. So then, the next stage is by 8th grade, that 8th grade was actually where I built the adder subtractor device and won all these awards for the best electronics prize in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was competing with 12th graders. I didn't know it. I just thought I got the best award for 8th grade, but I'd actually beat out all the 12th graders. In high school, my electronics, I was one of the bright people winning the math awards and all, but my electronics teacher realized that I knew everything, and all I would do is play pranks and wire up other people's radios to explode. And although one really funny story, I'm going to tell one funny story. I had a lab partner, Bill Werner, and I kind of didn't want his lab partner anymore. He came to me once and he said, oh, he got assigned a project. He had to write a report on crystals. Crystals that are used in electronic projects to keep watches accurate nowadays. And he said, could I write it for him? So I said, sure, I'll write it for you. I wrote a beautiful report right out of the book, all the A and X and Y axes cuts and all this stuff. Showed it to him. Then I wrote a real phony one, like crystals like you have in gems and jewelry and crystals of crystalware and crystals for glasses and that kind of stuff. Totally phony one. And so I said, I'll put it up on the teacher's desk for you. So I put the phony one up there. Oh, he got in so much trouble, and he no longer my lab partner. Back in those days, we had big television sets that were based on vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes that take hundreds of volts to run, and inside the big tube that drew the picture on the screen needed 10,000 to 20,000 volts. It's a lot of power. And you're a hardware designer, if you come from my era and you claim to be a hardware person, you got whacked by a colored TV one day. It threw you 5 feet backwards into a tool cabinet. That's how you tell. I have a little device now that I bought. It's for fun. It's like a Russian roulette, but 4 people put their fingers in the slots. And a little light goes ding, 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 and if it stops on, that person gets a shock. Software people, why would I want to get shocked? They won't play it. Hardware people just stick their fingers in. So anyway, my electronics teacher did many other students than myself in prior years. He would find a way to get the students out in the industry and do some real engineering work. And he arranged for me to go out and program a computer. We didn't have computers in our schools back then. Oh my gosh. I wanted to know what a computer was. I sort of discovered that a computer does one little thing at a time over and over and over, and that's really what makes computers powerful. I discovered that by seeing a science fair project where a motor stepped down doing one little thing, click, one little thing, click, one little thing, click, one little thing, and zip, the motor would go back. Sort of figured it out from something that I could understand. But I got to go down and program a computer. I bought a Fortran manual, the scientific programming language. One of my first programs was called the Knight's Tour of Chess, where a knight piece has to hit every single square on the chessboard exactly once, not twice. And you step around until you get trapped and you haven't hit every square, you back up and try a different move. You back up and try a different move. And that computer did 1,000,000 things a second. 1,000,000 things a second. A human couldn't count to 1,000,000 in their life probably, when the numbers get big. So this was incredible. And the lights flashed on the computer, but nothing came out for 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So then I started printing out chessboards. It was working perfectly. I did a little calculation. It wasn't going to have an answer for 10 to the 25th years. So, even if you have a very fast computer, orders of magnitude faster, millions of times faster, that isn't going to make up for not having a good approach, a good algorithm, a good method that comes from a human brain. Would computers are they still ever going to get to the point that they can come up with the methods to solve these difficult problems of the world? And I used to say, no, they'll never get there. We don't know anything like what the brain is. But now I'm starting to believe they will. So I went out and I programmed this place, and I saw a manual. A manual described a computer. It's little places to hold numbers. It's mathematical codes on what operations to do to add things, to store them into certain memory places. And I read the architecture. It was like the architecture of a building, where are the rooms, where are the windows. And then I said, wait a minute, from elementary school, I used to build those science fair projects. I know about little logic gates that make decisions. I wonder if